I never imagined my life could change in a single afternoon. One moment, I was enjoying the quiet comfort of my home, sipping tea, thinking about Harold, the man who had been my partner for decades. The next, I was trapped inside a commercial freezer, the cold gnawing at my bones, with only one thought racing through my mind. Betrayal could come from the people closest to you. My name is Dorothy Whitman, though everyone calls me Dot. At 69, I had built a life of careful planning, financial independence, and resilience. But nothing, not even my instincts, honed over decades, could have prepared me for the woman who would try to destroy me for money, for a fortune she could never earn. 6 months before that terrifying day, I believed I was lucky. My son Michael had moved in with his new wife Cassandra to care for me after Harold's passing. At least that's what I thought. Cassandra was sweet, polite, helpful, perfectly polished, in the way that made you trust her before you even had a chance to notice the cracks. The truth began to reveal itself in subtle ways. I overheard her once speaking urgently on the phone about my estate. $99 million, she whispered. The old woman has $99 million just sitting there. Insurance money, investment savings. She's too senile to manage it properly. Once she's gone, Michael inherits everything and I control him. I froze in the hallway, tea cooling in my hands, heart thudding with disbelief. My carefully managed life. My portfolio. My investments. Every penny. Harold and I had worked for decades to secure, was suddenly under threat. I started noticing small manipulations. Cassandra hid my reading glasses, then expressed concern when I couldn't find them. She moved medications to different cabinets, unplugged clocks, and acted alarmed when I slept past my usual wake-up time. Each incident seemed minor, but together they painted a picture of a woman slipping into senility. Michael, bless him, bought every bit of it. He nodded when she suggested I might need professional care, agreeing gently that perhaps it was time for temporary assisted living. I had seen this pattern before. Harold's Aunt Margaret had been maneuvered out of her home and wealth with subtle cruelty, all under the guise of concern. I refused to be the next victim. That Wednesday morning in early December, I confronted Cassandra in the study. She tried to take my investment documents, her nails perfectly manicured, her smile saccharine. Dot, you don't need to worry about these complicated papers anymore. Michael and I can handle everything. I pulled them back firmly, refusing to relinquish control. Her mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of something calculating, cold, predatory. She tried to deny it, but I could read the truth in her eyes. I knew exactly what she was plotting: isolation, deception, and eventually my death. By that evening, Michael had been fed a filtered version of the confrontation, one designed to make him doubt me. Cassandra's words twisted reality. I was paranoid, confused, unstable. Even with my own mind screaming the truth, I felt the isolation that comes when a manipulator expertly turns the world against you. That night, I lay awake listening to them talk in the next room, hearing fragments of her plan. Has to be done carefully. Cannot look suspicious. Inheritance laws make this tricky, but manageable. The cold dread settled over me, mingling with disbelief that the person I'd welcomed into my home could be plotting murder. The following morning, Cassandra invited me to see her catering warehouse, an ostensibly innocent outing. Exhausted from the emotional warfare and hoping I had misjudged her, I agreed. She led me through the impressive facility, talking proudly of her achievements. It wasn't until we reached the massive walk-in freezer that her plan revealed itself. "You always said I was cold," she said, as she shoved me inside. "Now it's time for you to chill out forever." The steel door slammed, the click of the lock echoing through my very bones. The freezer was immense, filled with shelves of frozen food, the temperature dipping far below freezing. Panic surged, but only briefly. Experience had taught me calm under pressure, and I immediately scanned the room. There on the wall was the safety equipment she had overlooked: an emergency blanket, a flashlight, and most crucially, the interior release handle. Wrapping myself in the blanket, I forced my thoughts into planning mode. Cassandra believed I would die here. She thought I would never emerge. But mistakes, even the smallest ones, could be exploited. 30 minutes of hypothermic threat became the longest 30 minutes of my life, each second sharpening my resolve. I discovered more than just escape options. Behind boxes of frozen vegetables, there were waterproof containers holding damning evidence, forged medical records, a power of attorney in my name that I hadn't signed, and a detailed timeline of my planned decline and death. And most chillingly, a life insurance policy naming Michael as the beneficiary, forged recently. She hadn't just planned to steal my money, she'd insured me like livestock. By mid-afternoon, I had gained control. Cassandra expected a corpse. Instead, I planned my counterstrike, gathering the evidence that would expose her and ensure justice. When the warehouse door opened, she could never have anticipated the one thing I had mastered in a lifetime: patience and cunning born of survival. I slipped out of the freezer, careful to leave no trace of my presence, and moved through the warehouse with quiet precision. Cassandra believed I was gone, that the old, trusting Dorothy Whitman had perished in the sub-zero room she had designed to kill me. But the truth was far different. I had the upper hand, now armed with every piece of evidence I had uncovered: forged documents, falsified medical records, the meticulously detailed journal chronicling every step of her plan. She had underestimated me in every way, assuming that age and trust equaled weakness. She had not accounted for decades of experience, for the sharp instincts of a woman who had survived losses and betrayal before. By late afternoon, I was sitting in her living room, comfortably settled with a glass of her expensive wine, evidence spread across the coffee table. Cassandra walked in moments later, unaware that the predator she had imagined herself to be had been neutralized by her intended victim. The shock on her face was instantaneous, raw, and beautiful. Her carefully cultivated mask of composure crumbled as she realized that not only had I survived, but I had also penetrated the layers of her deception and collected proof that could send her to prison for the rest of her life. Dot, she whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and fear. How did you? Her words faltered, incomplete, as though she couldn't form sentences fast enough to match the panic flooding her mind. I held up her journal, the leather cover creased with her meticulous notes. Every lie, every calculated move, every step she had taken to isolate me and manipulate Michael was documented. The betrayal she had hoped to conceal was now visible in stark detail. Her composure failed entirely as she moved toward the kitchen, likely intending to escape or retrieve a weapon. I warned her gently but firmly that any attempt to leave would be futile. I had anticipated every movement, every reaction. When she tried to plead, claiming love for Michael, I remained calm, letting the evidence do the talking. Her arguments dissolved under the weight of her own words, recorded and preserved for the authorities. The calculated horror of her scheme was undeniable, leaving no room for denial. By the time Michael arrived home, he encountered a scene he could never have imagined. His mother, the woman he had thought fragile and perhaps confused, was alive, calm, and resolute. Cassandra froze mid-step, caught between panic and anger, as the reality of her failure settled around her. Michael's face moved through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning comprehension of the depth of betrayal he had unknowingly witnessed. I handed him the journal, letting him read for himself the meticulous planning that had been aimed directly at me and indirectly at him. The shock was visible, the trust he had placed in his wife shattered as he absorbed the truth of her actions. Once Michael grasped the scope of Cassandra's deception, he made the only decision that matched the gravity of the crime he called the police. Cassandra attempted one last act of manipulation, claiming I had fabricated the evidence, but the overwhelming proof left her words hollow. She had underestimated both me and my son, assuming that their loyalty could be bought or coerced. She had calculated everything, but had failed to consider the moral compass and intelligence of the people she sought to control. When the authorities arrived, Cassandra was arrested without resistance. Her criminal history, forged documents, insurance fraud, and the attempted murder of a woman she had deemed weak were laid bare. Watching her led away in handcuffs spitting final insults, I felt something I had not expected: pity. Not for her punishment, but for the person she had chosen to become, willing to destroy lives in pursuit of wealth. Somewhere along the way, she had died too, not physically, but morally and spiritually. In the months that followed, I navigated the aftermath of her schemes. The financial chaos she had caused required meticulous attention, but with Michael's help, we restored order and security to our accounts. The revelation of her true identity, Jennifer Cash, a woman with multiple aliases and a history of targeting widowers and families, made me realize how narrowly I had escaped a fate far worse than death. Each step of her plan, every document forged, and every manipulation uncovered underscored the danger of blind trust even within one's own family. I also began to reflect on my life, the instincts I had often questioned, and the lessons that survival had taught me. For decades, I had managed not only finances, but relationships, responsibilities, and crises, navigating a world that often underestimated women like me. The freezer incident, terrifying as it was revealed, something profound: age and experience are powerful tools, and intuition is a weapon no manipulator can entirely neutralize. I realized that surviving Cassandra's calculated cruelty had transformed me. The woman who entered that warehouse fearful but determined had emerged stronger, sharper, and more confident in her judgment than ever before. It was during this period that the media began covering the story. Headlines celebrated the elderly grandmother who had outsmarted a would-be serial killer. I spoke to reporters with measured calm, recounting my experience not for attention, but as a warning and a lesson. Trust your instincts, I would tell other seniors. Do not ignore the subtle signs of manipulation. Protect yourself, and above all, remember that strength can be found in even the most unexpected moments, and courage is often quiet, patient, and unwavering. Spring arrived, bringing warmth and renewal, and with it, the sense of a life reclaimed. Michael, no longer blinded by deception, began to heal from the betrayal, rediscovering his capacity for judgment and discernment. Together, we began restoring not just our financial stability, but the emotional equilibrium that Cassandra had sought to disrupt. Our bond, tested in the crucible of manipulation and attempted murder, had emerged stronger, tempered by trust and shared resilience. The trial was scheduled for September, and the days leading up to it were filled with preparation, reflection, and an unexpected sense of purpose. I worked closely with my attorney, reviewing every detail of Cassandra's, or rather, Jennifer Cash's plot. The journals she had kept, the forged medical documents, the fabricated insurance policies, every calculated step toward my elimination was meticulously documented. It was shocking to consider the level of sophistication she had achieved over years of targeting vulnerable families. Yet it was also comforting to know that her meticulousness had been my salvation. Each piece of evidence was a thread in a web that now would expose her for who she truly was. When the trial began, the courtroom was tense with anticipation. I took my seat as a witness, feeling the weight of years and experience settle on my shoulders. Across the room, Jennifer Cash sat in an orange jumpsuit, her carefully maintained appearance replaced by the stark reality of incarceration. Her gaze met mine, once fleeting, but charged with everything she had tried to hide: calculating intelligence fury, and finally desperation. The defense attorney attempted to undermine my credibility, suggesting that a 70-year-old woman might misinterpret events, that perhaps paranoia or confusion had driven my testimony. I held my head high, answering with calm precision, detailing every manipulation, every conversation, every calculated attempt to isolate me from my son. The jury listened intently, some nodding in acknowledgement as the truth unfolded. The strongest moment came when the courtroom played the recording from her warehouse call to 911. Her voice cold and meticulously crafted to suggest my accidental death echoed through the room. I watched the faces of the jury as the reality of her deceit hit them. Michael, sitting beside me, visibly struggled with the betrayal. His confusion turned to shock and finally to understanding as he realized how fully he had been manipulated. Watching him process the truth, his love for her colliding with the undeniable evidence of her crimes, was both heartbreaking and vindicating. In addition to the attempted murder, the prosecution presented the extensive financial fraud, the forged documents, and her long history under different names. Jennifer Cash's life, as it turned out, was a meticulously constructed series of manipulations and murders, each designed to exploit widowers and wealthy families. The evidence was overwhelming. Even her own attempts to argue insanity crumbled in the face of the methodical documentation she had left behind. The jury had no choice but to see the pattern. This was not a crime of impulse or mental instability. It was a business of deception and death. Outside the courtroom, the world reacted with fascination and horror. The media coverage was intense, but I took it all in stride. The focus for me was on the lessons learned and the lives potentially saved by my survival. I spoke to reporters carefully, emphasizing vigilance, intuition, and the need for older adults to protect themselves against manipulative schemes. My story became more than just a sensational headline. It was a cautionary tale, a guide for families, and a testament to resilience. Meanwhile, Michael worked tirelessly to repair the financial damage. Cassandra, or Jennifer, had left a trail of fraudulent accounts, forged checks totaling nearly $50,000, and access to investment accounts she had manipulated. With my guidance, he began untangling the web, meticulously restoring order and security. His transformation was remarkable. The boy who had once trusted too easily was now a man of discernment, determined not to let greed or manipulation harm those he loved again. Together, we rebuilt not just finances, but trust and emotional stability. As the trial concluded, the jury returned with a verdict that was almost anticlimactic in its certainty: guilty on all counts. 7 first-degree murders, multiple counts of fraud, attempted murder, and forgery, all convictions sealed Jennifer Cash's fate. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars, her freedom permanently revoked. I watched as the court acknowledged the magnitude of her crimes, as the pattern of manipulation and murder she had perfected over a decade was publicly revealed. The relief was profound, but so was a quiet sadness for the lives irreparably affected, for the families left to cope with her destruction. In the weeks that followed, I took steps to ensure that her victims' families received restitution through legal channels. The uncovering of her storage unit in Denver, filled with trophies of her crimes, wedding albums, jewelry, forged documents, and over $2 million in cash and gold coins, allowed a measure of justice for those whose lives she had devastated. While money could never replace lost lives or trust, it symbolized accountability and the possibility of recovery. Through it all, I reflected on the transformation I had undergone. The woman who had once been cautious, careful, and perhaps a little too trusting had emerged stronger, sharper, and more self-assured. Facing a life-threatening betrayal had revealed an inner strength I had not fully recognized before. The freezer had been a crucible, and I had survived not merely to exist, but to reclaim agency over my life, my finances, and my family. The lessons of survival were clear. Age does not equal weakness. Trust, while valuable, must be balanced with discernment. And perhaps most importantly, no one else should dictate the value of your life or the measure of your autonomy. I had learned to trust my instincts, to act decisively, and to protect myself, and in doing so, I had saved not just my own life, but potentially many others. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in decades. My garden, once a simple retreat, now felt like a sanctuary, a symbol of resilience and continuity. Michael had temporarily moved back home to help reorganize our affairs, his presence both reassuring and bittersweet. The boy who had blindly trusted his wife was now a man learning the difficult art of discernment. Together, we worked through the financial aftermath of Jennifer Cash's crimes, untangling her web of fraud, closing compromised accounts, and securing our investments. Every task we completed felt like reclaiming pieces of our lives that had been stolen, and with each victory, Michael seemed to regain a measure of his former confidence. Amid this flurry of activity, I discovered the hidden treasures Harold had prepared over the years, accounts and trusts I hadn't even known existed. My late husband had quietly protected our wealth, creating layers of financial security that would have survived any attempt at theft or manipulation. The $9 million Cassandra had known about was only a fraction of our true fortune, which was closer to $250 million. Harold's foresight was a testament to his careful, loving planning, ensuring that even if danger threatened me, the legacy we had built together would remain intact. His hidden foundation, designed to protect elders from financial abuse, became a project I embraced wholeheartedly. I poured myself into advocacy work, sharing my story, educating seniors, and offering practical advice on detecting fraud. It was work that gave me purpose and reinforced the truth that survival is not just about escaping harm, but using experience to prevent it for others. The garden became my favorite place to reflect. On crisp October afternoons, I would sit beneath the shade of the old oak tree, sipping tea and letting the wind carry away the remnants of fear that had once haunted me. Michael often joined me, and we would talk through the events that had tested us, analyzing the mistakes, the blind spots, and the hard truths we had faced. He admitted his guilt for trusting Jennifer, but I reminded him that love often blinds us and that recognition and growth were the measures that truly mattered. In those quiet moments, we reconnected not just as mother and son, but as partners in rebuilding our lives and securing a future where deception could not easily take root. The trial had been exhausting, both emotionally and physically, but it also offered closure. Jennifer Cash, once the charming and calculated predator, now appeared small and constrained in her orange jumpsuit. Her meticulously crafted image of innocence was stripped away, replaced by the stark reality of justice. She avoided eye contact with me, but I could feel the intensity of her presence, the hatred she harbored for the woman who had outsmarted her. It was a moment of vindication, yes, but also a sober reminder of how close I had come to being another casualty in her carefully plotted spree. Even after the trial, the ripple effects of her actions continued. The uncovering of her previous identities and crimes shocked the nation, revealing the extent of her deception and the number of lives she had disrupted. Families who had lost loved ones and fortunes were finally able to receive some measure of restitution, and federal authorities continued to investigate her activities across the country. The knowledge that my survival had contributed to exposing her network gave me a quiet sense of satisfaction and purpose. I had not only protected myself, but had potentially prevented further harm to countless others. Through it all, I had come to realize the depth of my own resilience. The events of the past year had transformed me. I was no longer merely Dorothy Whitman, a cautious and trusting widow. I had become a woman who could confront danger, navigate betrayal, and emerge stronger on the other side. The near-death experience in the freezer, the emotional manipulation by someone I had once trusted, and the painstaking reconstruction of my finances had all forged a new confidence within me. I understood more deeply than ever that age does not equate to vulnerability, that intuition is a powerful tool, and that vigilance is essential in protecting oneself from those who would exploit trust. As Michael and I sat together in the garden, the sunlight illuminating the vibrant colors of late spring blooms, I reflected on the journey we had endured. We had faced deception, danger, and near loss. But through it all, we had found resilience, clarity, and justice. The woman who had once been underestimated, who had been treated as frail and incapable, now stood fully empowered. And in that empowerment was a quiet triumph, not just over Jennifer Cash, but over the limitations and assumptions that society often imposes on age, experience, and wisdom. I had learned the most important lesson of all. Survival is not only about protecting oneself, but also about reclaiming agency, asserting truth, and ensuring that the lives of others are safeguarded from those who would seek to harm them. Each step I took, each decision I made in the aftermath was a testament to the power of awareness, courage, and unyielding determination. The life I had been given, threatened as it had been, was now one I could live fully and intentionally. The months following the trial felt surreal. Life had resumed its ordinary rhythms, yet nothing about me or my family was quite the same. Michael, once hesitant and unsure, had grown into a man tempered by experience, someone who could see clearly and act decisively. He took responsibility for the lapses that had allowed Jennifer Cash into our lives, but I reminded him gently that the blame lay not in his heart, but in the cunning of a predator who had perfected her craft over years. Together, we established systems to safeguard our finances, reorganized our estate, and fortified our home against the sort of deception we had narrowly survived. In doing so, I realized that the best protection is a combination of vigilance, knowledge, and trust in one's own instincts. I also began channeling my energy into advocacy work, volunteering with elder support groups and speaking to communities about financial fraud and exploitation. Sharing my story became a mission, a way to transform trauma into empowerment for others. I wanted seniors to know that awareness and assertiveness were not just tools, they were lifelines. Encouraging them to trust their intuition, question suspicious behaviors, and assert control over their own affairs became my new purpose, and it felt profoundly rewarding. In each person who gained confidence from my experience, I felt a part of my own power reflected back, and that was a healing balm I had never expected. The garden, once a refuge, now felt like a living testament to endurance. Its blooms, vibrant and resilient, mirrored my own journey. I would sit among the flowers with Michael, our conversations shifting from the haunting past to hopeful plans for the future. The shared work of tending to the plants became a metaphor for the rebuilding of our lives, nurturing what mattered, removing the weeds of deceit, and cultivating growth and beauty from what had been damaged. It was a quiet peace, a tangible reminder that life, like a well-tended garden, flourishes best with care, attention, and persistence. Occasionally, the media would contact me, fascinated by the story of how a 69-year-old grandmother had outwitted a serial con artist. I was selective in my interviews, choosing only those that would amplify the lessons of vigilance, empowerment, and resilience. I wanted the focus to be less about the drama of the events and more about the practical truths they revealed. Trust your instincts, I would say, and never allow the assumptions of others to diminish your voice. These interviews became opportunities to advocate, to educate, and to remind the world that age is not a vulnerability, but a wellspring of experience, insight, and strength. One October evening, I found myself reflecting on Harold's careful planning. His hidden accounts, trusts, and the foundation he had established revealed a foresight and dedication that I had always known he possessed, but had never fully appreciated. until this trial tested me. The $250 million we had accumulated was now protected our wealth, not just preserved, but aligned with a mission of good. I felt a profound gratitude for his wisdom and foresight, and it was clear that our legacy was not in numbers alone, but in the values of vigilance, justice, and generosity that we had cultivated together. I had learned that true protection is both practical and ethical, a combination of foresight, preparation, and moral clarity. Looking back, I realized that the ordeal had changed me in ways that no trial, no legal victory, and no restoration of stolen assets could fully capture. I had confronted betrayal at its most intimate level, faced mortal danger, and emerged not just alive, but transformed. The woman who had been locked in a freezer, threatened by greed and malice, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more discerning, and unafraid to assert her agency. The lessons of courage, discernment, and self-trust were no longer abstract. They were lived truths engraved in the rhythm of my days and the texture of my relationships. And in this reflection, I understood the most important truth, that resilience is not merely surviving hardship, but reclaiming life on your own terms, refusing to let fear dictate your actions, and using every experience, painful or empowering, to safeguard yourself and others. Life had tested me in ways I could never have anticipated, yet it had also granted me a second chance to live deliberately with wisdom, courage, and compassion. I knew as I raised my glass of Harold's favorite wine to the sunset that I had done more than survive. I had transformed danger into empowerment, fear into clarity, and betrayal into a lesson that could protect countless others. For anyone watching this story, remember, trust your instincts, value your experience, and never allow anyone to diminish your voice or your worth. Life will challenge you, and sometimes it will push you to the edge. But within you lies the strength to reclaim control, assert your truth, and emerge stronger than you ever imagined. My story is proof that age, experience, and courage together are formidable forces against deceit, and that the second chances we earn are treasures beyond measure. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to comment below with your own experiences or lessons learned. Your voice matters, and together we can help protect and empower each other.